The silent approach. The Vorthok Empire had conquered 47 star systems in the past 2 centuries. Their method was always the same: overwhelming force, swift victory, complete subjugation. Admiral Kethver had personally overseen 12 of these conquests, and he understood the mathematics of war better than most. Superior numbers, advanced technology, and ruthless efficiency always won. That's why the sight on his tactical display confused him so deeply. The 3 human colonies in the Kepler system had fallen in less than 6 hours. The mining operations on Kepler 44 to B, the agricultural domes on Kepler 44 to C, and the research stations orbiting the gas giant had surrendered without firing a single shot. Nearly 2 million human civilians now lived under Vorthok occupation, their resource-rich worlds adding to the Empire's growing strength. It had been almost too easy. Now, 3 weeks later, humanity's response had finally arrived. A single ship. Admiral, his tactical officer, Sub-Commander Zixtel, approached with visible confusion. The human vessel has dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge. They're requesting permission to approach. Kethver's eyes focused on the display. The ship was massive by human standards, easily 3 kilometers long, but it was alone. His fleet consisted of 237 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts and a battle station. This single human ship was like sending a fishing boat against a tsunami. "What class of vessel?" Kethver asked, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into galactic standard. "Our databases identify it as a Prometheus-class deep space vessel, primarily designed for long-range exploration and diplomatic missions. It carries minimal weapons, mostly defensive systems." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what humans might recognize as laughter. A diplomatic ship. Are they surrendering? The entire human territory? Unknown, sir. They're broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies. The message is simple. We request a meeting to discuss terms. Kethver considered this. In his experience, species that sent single ships to negotiate were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Humans had a reputation for both. Grant them approach to the outer perimeter, full scans. If they so much as power up a weapons system, destroy them. The human ship, designated US Prometheus according to their transmissions, approached slowly. Its hull was scarred from long journeys through deep space, and its design was purely functional rather than intimidating. As it drew closer, Kethver could see observation decks and what appeared to be botanical gardens behind transparent aluminum windows. This was not a warship. "Sir, they're requesting permission to dock with our command station," Zixtel reported. "Denied. They can state their business from their ship." The communication channel opened, and a human face appeared on the main screen. It was a woman with graying hair and tired eyes, wearing a simple uniform without excessive decoration. She looked exactly like what she was, a career diplomat, not a warrior. "Admiral Kethver," she said, her voice carrying the weight of defeat. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earthship Prometheus. I come to discuss the terms of a broader surrender." Kethver's interest peaked. Broader surrender. The Kepler colonies were ... a test. "We understand that now. The human government has authorized me to negotiate the surrender of additional systems in exchange for the safety of our civilian populations. This was unexpected. Most species fought until the bitter end, requiring the Vorthok to destroy military installations and break planetary defenses. Voluntary surrender was rare and valuable. It saved time, resources, and lives on both sides. What systems are you prepared to surrender? Kethva asked. Captain Vasquez's image flickered slightly as she consulted something off-screen. We have 12 mining systems, 8 agricultural worlds, and 3 industrial complexes that we're prepared to evacuate in exchange for guaranteed safe passage for all civilian populations. Zigstel leaned close to the Admiral. Sir, that's nearly 30 star systems. The resource value alone would double our territorial holdings. Kethva felt a stirring of satisfaction. This was better than he had hoped. And your military installations, we would decommission all defensive platforms and surrender our patrol fleets intact. We're not asking for military guarantees, only civilian ones. The Admiral's tactical mind was already calculating 30 systems without a fight, intact infrastructure, willing cooperation. It was almost too good to be true. What do you require in return? He asked. Time, Vasquez replied. Some of these systems have populations in the millions. We need 6 months to organize evacuation fleets and relocate civilians to our inner colonies. We also need guarantees that evacuating civilians won't be targeted during transport. 6 months. It was longer than Kethva preferred, but for 30 systems. This is acceptable in principle. However, we require detailed intelligence on all systems being surrendered. Defense grids, resource locations, population centers, industrial capacity. Of course, Dr. James Chen, our xenobiologist and cultural liaison, has prepared comprehensive data packages. We can begin transmitting immediately. Over the next several hours, the humans provided detailed intelligence on every system they were offering to surrender. The data was incredibly thorough, showing not just military installations but industrial capacities, resource extraction rates, and even civilian infrastructure. It was exactly what the Vorthok needed to efficiently occupy and exploit these new territories. Captain Vasquez proved to be an excellent negotiator, reasonable and cooperative. She provided alternative timelines when the Admiral pushed for faster evacuation, offered additional minor systems when he demanded more territory, and even suggested ways to minimize disruption to existing mining operations. You are being surprisingly accommodating, Kethva observed during one of their sessions. Vasquez smiled sadly. Admiral, I've spent my career trying to prevent wars. I've seen what happens when species fight the Vorthok Empire. The Altarian Confederacy fought for 3 years and lost everything. The Zenith Coalition tried to make a stand and watched their homeworld burned. At least this way, our people live. It was a pragmatic approach that Kethva respected. Too many species let pride override logic. There is one more thing, Vasquez said as their negotiations neared completion. Our government has authorized me to discuss a broader non-aggression pact. We're prepared to formally recognize Vorthok sovereignty over all surrendered territories and establish trade agreements for our remaining systems. This was beyond Kethva's expectations. Not only would they gain 30 systems without firing a shot, but they would also establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. It would be the first time in Vorthok history that a species had voluntarily submitted to their authority. Your government must be very wise, Kethva said. We learn from others' mistakes, Vasquez replied. We've studied every conflict the Vorthok Empire has fought. We know how this ends if we choose to fight. As the negotiations continued, found himself almost liking the human captain. She was intelligent, reasonable, and clearly cared deeply about her people. When she spoke about the children on the agricultural worlds or the research teams on the outer colonies, her voice carried genuine emotion. Dr. Chen proved equally helpful. providing detailed cultural information about human colonies and even suggesting ways to minimize culture shock during the transition. He explained human psychology, work patterns, and social structures that would help the Vorthok integrate these new territories more smoothly. Humans are remarkably adaptable, Dr. Chen explained during one session. Most of our colonists are already accustomed to living under difficult conditions. With proper notice and fair treatment, the transition to Vorthok administration could be relatively smooth. The doctor paused, then added quietly, "We just want our people to survive." By the end of the third day, the framework of the agreement was complete. The Vorthok would gain 30 star systems. The humans would have 6 months to evacuate civilians, and both species would establish formal diplomatic relations. It was, by any measure, a complete victory for the Empire. That's when Captain Vasquez made her final request. "Admiral, there's one last thing. Our evacuation fleets are already positioning themselves throughout the systems to be surrendered. We request that your forces maintain their current positions until the evacuation is complete. We don't want any ... incidents that might complicate the transition." Kethfer considered this. His fleet was currently positioned around the 3 occupied colonies, and he had planned to begin immediate expansion into the surrendered systems. However, the human request was reasonable. Premature military movements could indeed complicate the evacuation process. "Acceptable," he agreed. "However, we will be monitoring all evacuation activities. Any deviation from the agreed timeline will void the arrangement." "Of course," Vasquez replied. "We'll provide daily reports on evacuation progress." As the human ship prepared to depart, Kethfer felt a satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. This had been a perfect conquest, maximum gain with minimal cost. The Empire would remember this as the day humanity bowed to Vorthok superiority. Sub-Commander Zixtal approached his station. "Sir, should we begin preparing occupation forces for the surrendered systems?" "Not yet," Kethfer replied. "We'll honor the agreement. 6 months to evacuate civilians. Then we take possession of the most resource-rich territory the Empire has ever acquired without firing a shot." The Admiral watched as the UES Prometheus slowly accelerated away from the system, its hull catching the light of the Kepler star. Soon, that star would shine on Vorthok colonies, Vorthok mining operations, and Vorthok glory. He had no idea that Captain Alina Vasquez was sitting in her command chair, watching the same star, and smiling for entirely different reasons. The human way Captain Alina Vasquez stood in her ready room, looking out at the stars as the UES Prometheus traveled away from the Kepler system. Behind her, Dr. James Chen was reviewing the final reports from their diplomatic mission. "They believed every word," Chen said, his voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. "Admiral Kethfer thinks he's just won the greatest victory in Vorthok history." Vasquez turned from the window. "How long until Phase 2 begins?" "The evacuation fleets should be reaching the outer systems within the next 72 hours. Admiral Morrison's task force is already in position beyond the Vorthok sensor range." Alina nodded. The hardest part was over. For 3 days, she had sat across from Admiral Kethfer and convinced him that humanity was surrendering. Every word had been carefully crafted, every gesture calculated to reinforce the image of a defeated species seeking mercy. It had been the performance of her life. "Ma'am," her communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving confirmation signals from the evacuation fleets. Project Exodus is proceeding on schedule." Alina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Project Exodus had been humanity's response to the Vorthok invasion of the Kepler colonies, while the aliens had been congratulating themselves on their easy victory. Humanity had been evacuating civilians from 47 star systems, not the 30 systems Alina had surrendered to Admiral Kethva. All 47 systems in the potential path of Vorthok expansion. The operation had begun the moment the Kepler colonies fell. Every available ship, from massive colony transports to private cargo haulers, had been mobilized. Families were given 24 hours to gather essential belongings. Industrial workers were relocated to safer systems. Research teams transmitted all data to secure servers and abandoned their facilities. In 3 weeks, humanity had evacuated over 50 million civilians. Dr. Chen, Elena said, "Please compile the final resource assessments." Chen activated his tablet, displaying data that would have horrified Admiral Kethva. All mining operations have been shut down and equipment removed. Industrial fabrication plants have been stripped of critical components. Agricultural systems have been seeded with genetic locks that will prevent crop growth within 6 months. Research facilities have been systematically destroyed, with all data transmitted to secure locations. Alina studied the numbers and the automated systems fully deployed. Every major installation, every mining facility, every industrial complex is now rigged with quantum demolition charges. The moment any non-human ship enters these systems, everything of value will be destroyed. This was the true genius of the human plan. While Alina had been negotiating with Admiral Kethva, human engineering teams had been installing sophisticated automated defense systems throughout the surrendered territories. Not weapons designed to fight the Vorthok, but systems designed to deny them everything they wanted. The psychological profile was accurate, Chen continued. The Vorthok are conquerors, not builders. They depend on capturing intact infrastructure and existing resources. Without those, territorial expansion becomes a massive drain on their economy. Alina remembered the extensive research that had gone into preparing for this moment. Humanity had studied every Vorthok conquest, analyzing their methods, their weaknesses, their psychology. The aliens were incredibly efficient at overwhelming military resistance, but they had never faced an enemy that would choose to destroy everything rather than let it be taken. "Ma'am," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a priority. Transmission from Earth Command." The image of Admiral Sarah Morrison appeared on the main screen. Morrison was the architect of Project Exodus, the woman who had convinced Earth's government to abandon 47 star systems to save their people. "Captain Vasquez," Morrison said, "I trust the negotiations went well. Admiral Kethva believes he's won the greatest victory in Vorthok history," Alina replied. "He's giving us 6 months to evacuate civilians from 30 systems that are already empty." Morrison smiled grimly. "And he has no idea that we're evacuating 47 systems, not 30. None at all. The additional 17 systems weren't mentioned in our negotiations. As far as the Vorthok know, those systems are still fully operational." This was the second layer of the deception. The Vorthok would expect to eventually discover the 30 systems Alina had surrendered, but they would also stumble upon 17 additional systems that appeared to be completely normal. When they attempted to occupy those systems, they would trigger the automated defenses and lose everything. "What's the status of the civilian evacuation?" Alina asked. 93%. "Complete," Morrison reported. "The remaining populations are being evacuated from the most distant systems. We'll have everyone out within the week." Alina felt a profound sense of relief. The hardest part of the entire operation had been keeping the evacuation secret while making it appear that the colonies were still fully populated. Automated systems had continued broadcasting normal communications traffic. Holographic projectors had maintained the appearance of normal activity, and a skeleton crew of volunteers had remained behind to maintain the deception. Admiral Elena said, "What's the status of the Vorthok fleet?" "Exactly where you left them. They're maintaining position around the 3 occupied colonies, just as you negotiated. Admiral Kethba is being a perfect gentleman, honoring the 6-month timeline." Alina almost felt sorry for the Vorthok admiral. He was an honorable soldier following the rules of war as he understood them. He had no idea that humanity played by different rules entirely. Ma'am, Dr. Chen interrupted. "We're receiving final reports from the automated systems. All 17 surprise systems are now fully rigged. The moment any Vorthok ship enters those systems, every installation will be destroyed simultaneously, and the psychological warfare component fully deployed. Each system will broadcast a message explaining exactly what happened and why. The Vorthok will understand that humanity chose to destroy everything rather than let it be taken." Alina reviewed the final components of their strategy. The Vorthok would discover that they had been deceived, that the humans had evacuated 47 systems instead of 30, and that every attempt to occupy human territory would result in the complete destruction of everything valuable. More importantly, they would realize that humanity was willing to sacrifice decades of development and trillions of credits worth of infrastructure rather than submit to conquest. "There's one more element," Morrison said. "Captain Rodriguez's Intelligence Division has identified 63 additional human systems that are potential Vorthok targets. Project Exodus is expanding to include those systems as well." Alina stared at the Admiral. "You're evacuating 63 more systems, 110 systems total. We're not just denying the Vorthok their immediate goals. We're creating a buffer zone of empty, rigged systems that will make any further expansion into human space economically impossible." The scope of what humanity was doing began to sink in. They were abandoning over a century of colonial expansion, sacrificing the homes and livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people, and creating the largest evacuation in human history, all to make a point. "The economic cost, ... double quotes, Alina began. "Will be enormous," Morrison agreed. "But the alternative is worse. The Vorthok respect strength, and they understand economics. When they realize that conquering human space will cost them more than they could ever gain, they'll look for easier prey." Alina understood. This wasn't just about saving the Kepler colonies or protecting human territory. This was about changing the fundamental equation of conquest. Humanity was teaching the Vorthok that some species would rather destroy everything than be enslaved. "Ma'am," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Kethva." Alina felt her heart rate increase. Put it through. The familiar image of the Vorthok admiral appeared on the screen. His 4 eyes were focused intently on the camera, and his mandibles were clicking in what Alina had learned to recognize as confusion. "Captain Vasquez," he said, "our long-range sensors are detecting unusual activity in the Altair system. It appears to be completely abandoned." Alina had been expecting this. The Altair system was one of the 17 surprise systems that the Vorthok weren't supposed to know about. Their scouts had discovered it ahead of schedule. "Admiral," she replied calmly, "I'm not sure what you mean. Our sensors show no life signs, no communications traffic, no industrial activity. The system appears to have been evacuated. Alina paused, as if considering how to respond. Admiral, the Altair system wasn't included in our surrender negotiations. That system isn't scheduled for evacuation. Then why is it empty? Alina smiled. Admiral, perhaps you should send a ship to investigate. The transmission ended, and Alina turned to Dr. Chen. How long until the Vorthok reach the Altair system? At their current speed, approximately 6 hours. Alina nodded. Then, in 6 hours, Admiral Kethva will understand what humanity really thinks about conquest. In the Altair system, automated sensors detected the approaching Vorthok scout ship. As it crossed the system boundary, every mining facility, every industrial complex, every piece of valuable infrastructure simultaneously detonated. The scout ship's crew watched in horror as an entire star system's worth of resources vanished in a series of brilliant explosions. Then the message began broadcasting on all frequencies. This is the United Earth Colonial Authority. The Altair system has been evacuated and sterilized to prevent occupation by hostile forces. This action demonstrates humanity's commitment to the principle that our worlds belong to us or to no one. Any further attempts to occupy human territory will result in similar destruction. We will not be conquered. We will not be enslaved. We will not submit. The message repeated continuously as the scout ship fled back to Admiral Kethva's fleet. 6 hours later, Alina received another transmission from the Vorthok Admiral. This time, his mandibles weren't clicking with confusion. They were clicking with what Alina recognized as fear. "Captain Vasquez," he said, "we need to talk."